Coming up next, the story of the breakout smash by one of the most prolific duos of the rock era. But when this song was first made, it was placed on an album that floundered. This duo was so distraught by the poor sales of their debut record, they split up. One moved a continent away, resigned to go down a completely new career path. Their historic greatness as a duo may never have been realized if it hadn't been for a crafty A&R man who devised a plan to revitalize this song by remixing and re-releasing it. But he didn't reveal his plan to the two artists that he signed to a record deal. They were livid, when they heard the song, but they got over it when it went to #1. The story of a song 60 years ahead of its time. We'll find out what I mean next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you ever envied the Jetsons' cool future world, you're gonna dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe right now below, click the big red button, and click the bell so you always know when our latest and greatest are coming out. Also, check us out on Patreon. We have more content there that helps us keep it a daily channel. So we're gonna kick off this episode by doing a little self-reflection. Bear with me here. Think back over your life and single out the most pivotal moment or moments that unexpectedly altered the path of your future. Sometimes the difference between success and futility comes down to one of those single moments. Moments where something happens that you least expect, that at first appear to be setbacks, but later it proved to be a blessing in disguise. For Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, the moment that led to two friends becoming one of the most successful duos of the rock era, it was a decision that an A&R man made to do a remix of their song, The Sound of Silence. He made this move completely behind their backs, and when Paul Simon, the author of the song, heard the new version, he was horrified. As fate would have it, the song wasn't remixed. You may never have heard of Simon and Garfunkel. Imagine this scene. It's a quiet evening and a young Paul Simon finds himself sitting on the cool tile of his bathroom floor. With the lights switched off and the door shut tight, he's in his own little world, where the darkness somehow sparks his creativity. Paul turns on the water faucet in the bathroom sink and he lets the water flow because the sound of running water is soothing to this hopeful songwriter. The way one can find a fountain or a gurgling brook to be a comfort, to their senses. As Paul sits there, tunes start flowing through his mind. Before he knows it, he's crafting the words to what will become one of the most iconic songs of all time.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
But what's the story behind that haunting opening line, killer opening line? Hello, darkness, my old friend. Turns out it's not just a random lyric. It's a throwback to Paul Simon's childhood, when he'd sing in that very bathroom, reveling in the echoes bouncing off the walls as if it were his own private rehearsal studio. The song was also a foreshadowing to a heartbreaking yet inspirational development with another deep friendship for Paul's singing partner, Art Garfunkel. And so on a bathroom floor, of all places, the stage is set for the tale of how The Sound of Silence came to be. Paul Simon was fresh out of college, just 21 years old when he wrote The Sound of Silence.
I've come to talk with you again.
Not long after he wrote the song, he was hired for his first gig in the music biz, working for one of the largest publishing companies in the industry. His duties entailed hitting up record labels all over Manhattan, trying to sell them on songs he thought their artists might dig. Paul worked at that publishing company for about 6 months, but he didn't sell one song. He felt guilty because they were paying him and he delivered nothing in return. So to make him feel better, he decided to give the company a couple of songs that he'd written, including his most recent composition, The Sound of Silence. His guilt turned to frustration, though, when the company gave him the runaround. So he not only quit his job, he rescinded his offer and defiantly told the bosses that he was not going to give him his new song. He was disgusted by the way that he was being treated. He made up his mind right then and there to publish the song for himself and retain full ownership of all of his songs. That move would prove to be one of the smartest moves that Paul ever made in his professional career.
Was a vision softly creeping,
Determined to find a home for his latest creation, Paul pitched The Sound of Silence to folk singer Odetta. But fortunately, Odetta, she passed on the opportunity. Now, I said fortunately because if she would have accepted the song to cut for her own record, it probably would have been buried in obscurity, rather than a springboard into rock history. Then Paul recorded an acoustic version of the song with his friend Art Garfunkel as a demo to shop to record labels. Paul gave the demo to Columbia Records A&R executive Tom Wilson. Tom liked the demo enough to find the right act to record it. Now, at first, Tom felt The Sound of Silence was best suited for a new British act called the Pilgrims. But Paul was able to convince Tom to let him and Art perform the song at a live audition. The audition went very well, so Tom was confident enough to put his reputation on the line and get the legendary hitmaker Clive Davis to sign the duo to Columbia for a one-record deal, with the first right of refusal. The deal was what they call a 1+1 deal back in the day. Prior to Paul and Art being signed to Columbia, they had recorded together under two different names. First as Tom and Jerry, then Kane and Gar. Although barely 21, Paul Simon, he'd had enough of the cutesy stage names. He wanted to use his real name from now on. Now, The Sound of Silence, it would be the focal track for the debut Simon & Garfunkel album, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m.
That voices never share.
The problem was Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. was tanking. It had only sold a few thousand units by that time. The abysmal sales greatly disappointed Paul, so he moved to London to see if he could ignite his fortunes in the British market. While there, he recorded the Paul Simon Songbook, which features a version of The Sound of Silence, changing the title from The Sounds of Silence, as it was billed on Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. But then an interesting thing happened. Without any record label or publicity push, radio stations picked up The Sound of Silence in the spring of '65. It all started when a late-night DJ at WBZ Radio in Boston decided to spin the track, attracting a college-age crowd. Students at Harvard and Tufts University loved it. The song quickly gained popularity down the East Coast, even reaching Cocoa Beach, Florida, just in time for spring break. At the beach, a Columbia Records promotional executive noticed the overwhelming interest in The Sound of Silence amongst the beachgoers, prompting him to alert the New York office about its sudden passion there. When Tom Wilson caught wind of the under-the-radar activity for The Sound of Silence, he put a plan into action, but he didn't say a thing to Simon or Garfunkel. Tom Wilson knew a thing or two about transforming an acoustic folk song into pop gold. After all, he was Bob Dylan's producer for several years, starting in '63, and he was credited as being the person responsible for navigating Dylan's transition from acoustic folk to electric rock. Paul Simon was often compared to Bob Dylan, both signed to Columbia Records. While Simon acknowledged Dylan's influence on The Sound of Silence, he maintained he wasn't trying to necessarily emulate him. In a 2000 interview with Mojo magazine, Simon explained, and I quote, "I tried very hard not to be influenced by him, and that was difficult. The Sound of Silence, which I wrote when I was 21, I never would have written it if it were not for Bob Dylan. Never. He was the first guy to come along in a serious way that wasn't a teen language song. I saw him as a major guy whose work I didn't want to imitate in the least." End quote. So actually on June 15, 1965, after recording sessions for Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, Tom Willison brought together a new lineup, including guitarist Al Gargoni, drummer Bobby Gregg, guitarist Vinnie Bell, and bassist Bob Bushnell, to revamp The Sound of Silence. The original recording's tempo was erratic, posing challenges for the musicians. Engineer Roy Haley applied heavy echo during the remix, kind of akin to the Bird style. The revamped single initially targeted college FM rock stations before a commercial AM radio release on September 13th of 1965. Simon and Garfunkel, they were kept in the dark on all of this. Because of their inactive status as a duo, they were still under contract with Columbia Records. Adding instruments or vocals to previous releases without consulting artists, that was not uncommon in the industry back in those days, unfortunately.
While I was sleeping, and the vision.
Now, as we further break down this song, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. So right now, Zenni is running a spectacular spring sale. It's this week only. Buy one pair, you save 15%. Buy two pairs, save 20%. Buy three pairs, save 25%. The minimum order threshold is $40. Click on our link up here or use the coupon code SPRING24POR. It only runs till Sunday, March 17th, so act now. Click down below.
That was planted in my brain.
When Paul heard the remix of The Sound of Silence, and he learned of the plan to relaunch the single, he was shocked. He was pissed, really mad that the label would do something so deceitfully. But when he heard about the bubbling airplay, he calmed down a bit and he got on board with Wilson's mission. The electrified remix of The Sound of Silence skyrocketed to success, prompting Simon and Garfunkel to reunite. Without Wilson's clandestine intervention and The Sound of Silence turning into an unexpected hit, the duo most certainly would have pursued separate paths. We never would have had a Simon and Garfunkel. When the song was breaking, the two friends, they were separated by an ocean, thousands of miles apart physically and emotionally. At the time the song topped the Billboard Hot 100 in the States, Simon was in England while Garfunkel was at college on the East Coast. Not only did The Sound of Silence rise to #1 in America, it was also a #1 single in Japan and South Africa. And it went to the top 10 in many countries throughout the world.
In restless dreams I walked alone.
The amazing public response to The Sound of Silence prompted a dramatic about-face for Paul Simon. He came back from England, and he temporarily moved back with his parents in New York.
Of silence.
In 1967, The Sound of Silence was unintentionally cemented into the zeitgeist of American cinema when it was used in an essential scene and for the soundtrack of the iconic film The Graduate. Of course, starring Anne Bancroft, Catherine Ross, and the great Dustin Hoffman.
Within the sound of silence.
Truth be told, though, the use of The Sound of Silence in The Graduate, it wasn't a stroke of genius. It was actually a decision made under duress. The Sound of Silence was actually just a temporary placeholder. I mean, it was an old song by the time it was used there. Director Mike Nichols didn't intend to make the song into the final cut. But the music supervisor couldn't find anything that they liked better, and time was running out, so they just kept the song in the scene. Now, some 57 years later, you can't even imagine this critical scene without The Sound of Silence, playing in the soundtrack. Graduate is certainly synonymous with the music of Simon and Garfunkel, no question.
Are you going to Scarborough?
Now, although he wasn't the artist that penned the song, Art Garfunkel would often explain its meaning to live audiences when he and Paul performed The Sound of Silence in concert. While introducing the song alongside his singing partner, Art captured its essence by describing The Sound of Silence as a reflection of the struggle for people to connect, not just on an international level, but especially on an emotional one. It's about the barriers that keep us from truly loving one another. I love that interpretation.
But my words, like silent raindrops, fell.
Paul Simon was truly a visionary lyricist, especially on this song. He seems to predict our time 60 years after the song was written when he said, "And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made, and the sign flashed out its warning in the words that it was forming." That's a reference to our attachment, our worship of our phones, our gadgets, right?
To the neon god they made.
The Sound of Silence took on a new meaning for Art, though, when his dear friend Sandy Greenberg was diagnosed with glaucoma and ultimately lost his vision. Darkness is referenced in the line, "Hello, darkness, my old friend." That was Art's way of empathizing with Sandy's sudden blindness. Sandy Greenberg is a remarkable human being. Sandy noticed something was wrong with his vision when he was a junior in high school. He was pitching in the 7th inning of a baseball game for his high school team when his eyes became very cloudy. He had a hard time concentrating on the batters. After numerous tests, the doctors thought it was just conjunctivitis, pink eye, and he told Sandy it'd clear up soon. But it didn't. Turns out Sandy had glaucoma, and it wrecked his optic nerves, and then the hits just kept on coming. Sandy's family couldn't afford the treatment, so he had to bail on college. And man, emotionally, he was in a rough spot. He got super depressed, he stopped chatting with people, and he basically shut himself off from the world. Sandy was in an unimaginable position. He was blind, and he had to figure out what to do next. Most people would have just stayed in Buffalo, where he was from, feeling sorry for themselves and living the safest, most unchallenging life possible. I mean, who could blame anyone for doing that under such affliction? However, Sandy, he didn't take the safe route. Instead, he went back to Columbia University to do what he intended to do with the rest of his life. Luckily, Sandy had his girlfriend, Sue, it's now his wife, She was by his side along with his best bud, Art Garfunkel and Jerry Speyer. They all had his back, helping him through some seriously rough times, and cheering him on as he went on to incredible achievements. And Art refused to give up on his lifelong friend. It was Art that convinced Sandy to give Columbia another shot, and after some persuasion, Sandy agreed. Once back at college, Art really stepped up to help him. He helped him get to class, he took care of any injuries, he walked around the city with his friend, filled out forms, basically anything that his friend Sandy needed. Art even gave himself the nickname Darkness, when he was with Sandy, just to show him how much he empathized with his friend's predicament. On one typical chaotic day at New York City's Grand Central Station, Art dropped a bombshell on Sandy. He claimed he had an urgent assignment and he had to bail. He left Sandy just alone in the sea of bustling strangers. Panic set in for Sandy as he navigated his way back to campus, bumping into people and objects along the way. It was a nerve-wracking couple of hours for him, to say the least. But here's the twist. Art had actually lied to Sandy. He never received an urgent message, and he never actually left Sandy's side. He followed his friend the entire way, teaching him a valuable lesson about willing your independence. Art apologized to Sandy for lying to him, but after that agonizing experience that Sandy called the worst couple of hours of his life at that point, Sandy realized he could truly be self-reliant, and he took control of his life. With newfound confidence, Sandy and Artie went on to graduate from college, each embarking on their own paths. So now that you know Sandy, fast forward a few years, and Sandy Greenberg got an unexpected call from his old buddy Artie, who had a wild idea to record an album with his pal Paul Simon. But the catch was they needed $400 to make it happen. Now, Sandy's bank account wasn't exactly overflowing. In fact, he had $404 to his name. Without a second thought, though, he handed over every last penny to Art, knowing full well it was the least he could do after all the kindness Artie showed him back in college. So armed with Sandy's hard-earned cash, Simon and Garfunkel hit the studio, and they laid down tracks for their debut album Wednesday morning 3 a.m., which, as I mentioned, was a commercial flop. Sandy, though, he never threw that back in Art's face, because Sandy believed in Art, just like Art had believed in Sandy. Among his many achievements, Sandy Greenberg invented the speech compression machine and created the first database tracking antibiotic resistance around the globe. And actually in 2020, Sandy wrote a memoir of his diverse experiences. Hello, Darkness, My Old Friend, How Daring Dreams and Unyielding Friendship turned one man's blindness into an extraordinary vision of life. With an introduction, of course, by Art Garfunkel.
I once tried to close my eyes for a day in an effort to truly empathize with my dear friend here.
As I mentioned earlier and in other features we've done on Simon and Garfunkel, I just marvel at how humble Paul Simon is about his lyrics. He is such a gifted lyricist. He never learned to read music, but he just has a way with writing songs that have remarkable melodies and resonant substance. Not surprisingly, he has downplayed the genius of the Sound of Silence, avoiding any hint of self-importance. Paul shared his take on why the Sound of Silence struck such a chord with listeners. He believes that its success boiled down to the simplicity of both the melody and the lyrics, which tapped into feelings of youthful alienation. Despite being just 21 at the time, Paul felt the lyrics captured a sense of post-adolescent angst that many could relate to. Now, while the theme wasn't particularly sophisticated, if you will, it rang true for countless people who felt unheard or disconnected from the world. Plus, the song's catchy and straightforward melody, it made it easy for listeners to sing along to, further contributing to its widespread appeal.
The words of the prophets are written on the subway wall.
Half a century after its debut, the heavy metal band Disturbed dropped their own rendition of The Sound of Silence. Very powerful. That happened in December of 2015. Accompanied by a music video, their cover shot to the top spot on the Billboard Hard Rock Digital Songs and Mainstream Rock charts. Became the band's best performing track on the Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 42. Down Under, it also made waves, hitting number 4 on the charts there in Australia. Disturbed's cover was also immensely popular in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Man, Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence, it carries profound symbolism and societal critique. The notion of a vision softly creeping while the narrator sleeps, symbolizes the subtle yet potent seeds of discontent and disillusionment taking root within individuals and society. The depiction of a hectic city street where 10,000 people, maybe more, move in silence highlights the prevalent isolation and the disconnection in contemporary society.
10,000 people, maybe more.
I wish I could say that things have changed, since Paul Simon wrote the song in the early 60s, but I can't.
Of silence.
Even though The Sound of Silence was penned almost 60 years ago, its themes of communication breakdown, societal indifference, and apathy, they remain strikingly relevant, especially today. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Simon and Garfunkel and The Sound of Silence. Is this not a perfect song? I mean, one of the greatest songs ever. What are your memories of it? What do you think about the lyrics? What do you think about Paul Simon as a philosopher, who almost like a prophet saying exactly what we're going through now? Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe. We would love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.